Hi, Ben. I'm Nick. I'm a student at U of M Dearborn. And I wanted to ask you about a statement you made earlier when you said voluntary decisions can't lead to exploitation. I think that's a little misleading.
Mutually voluntary, yeah.
Because what it assumes is that, even in nominally voluntary, instances, there can't be exploitative behavior. And I get sort of what you're saying. Like, usually when we think of exploitation, we think of, someone being forced or coerced to do something. But, if you take, for example, I can think of a million examples, but child labor laws, for instance, or the absence of them. When you had like children working in factories, for instance, and they're making a voluntary decision to go work in the factory, it seems like the argument carried out to the full conclusion would be, oh, that child needed food for his family, so we made a voluntary decision.
Well, you usually, honestly, I want to hear a better version of the question, so I'm going to push you not to use child labor laws, the reason being that my basic principle is the same as the principle of all Anglo-American law since the mid-19th century, which is that children are not considered fully rational actors capable of making voluntary decisions. So let's pick an example with an adult.
Okay, so
I think it's a good question, so I want to let's pick.
So the Lochner era of the Supreme Court, which was sort of coming out of the Gilded Age.
Right, I know Lochner, yeah.
Right, where the court basically decided, you have a right to contract, like an employer between an employee. You have a right to contract, and the government can't get involved.
Right.
All right, and you're coming out of an era which is already really rough economically for the United States. People don't have a lot of money, they're not making a lot. And so someone's like, totally at the bottom, and they, make a contract with one of these employers. They're making a decision. They're taking a bad, they're taking the least bad option.
Right.
And that employer might say, hey, you'll work for me, you'll work 80 hours a week,
right,
and I'll pay you $2 an hour. It's the least bad option, and it's a voluntary decision, but I think it still is exploitative.
Okay, but so here's the problem. In seeking to end that exploitation, what you are very often doing is providing them a choice now of no choice. Meaning, for example, let's take up minimum wage law, which is essentially, Lochner is talking about things like minimum wage laws. You're talking about maximum work hours and that sort of thing. So the problem with a minimum wage law is that what you have now done is you've circumscribed choice even further, because you're not actually giving people a broader range of choices. Now you're telling employers that they have to hire people at a certain price. They may think that the employee is not worth the price and just not hire them. And this is what happens very often with minimum wage laws. The solution to all of this is something that I believe in, which is private unionization. So I think the private unionization, you get together with all your friends, you say, listen, none of us are going to work for anything below this wage. We're not allowed to kneecap anybody because that's use of force. But if all of us agree, we're not going to go in, we're not going to work in this place that's going to kill us in 2 years. That's perfectly legitimate and good, right? Collective bargaining on a voluntary basis is a good thing and doesn't violate any free market principles. What I don't like is the idea that if you decide to take a job at $7.50 an hour, and I think that I could have bargained better than you, right? That I could have bargained it up to $10, for example. Or I think that if you had held out a little longer, you might have gotten $10. Or I think that maybe you couldn't have, but the guy can afford $10. You are now imposing your own view of a situation on the actors who are engaging in the act itself. We don't do this in any other area of life. It seems bizarre to me that we would do it in the area of economics.
All right. Thank you.